Or when Oswald Cam opened the grocery store in 1875 down here on the corner. It's a big part of this community, right? Anybody who drives by it knows about Cam's Corner, right? What was it when that came into being that people were imagining, dreaming for this community? Or back in 1900 when this place became West Park. You know, it was a muddy road that was so muddy that during the springtime people called this the Lost City because you couldn't get to it because of all the mud. Back then, what was it that people dreamed about for this community? What about 1903 when Reverend Reidinger named this the West Park Congregational Church? Or in 68 when they decided that it was going to become a part of the United Church of Christ? Or maybe on April 2nd, 1953 when Jim Furry was confirmed? What was it that people dreamed about during those days? We all have dreams for the spaces that we inhabit. That's just a natural part of life. And as the minister of faith in action for our association, I'm interested in how our understanding of the gospel relates to the dreams that we have about the spaces that we inhabit. What does the gospel have to do with these dreams about the spaces that we live in? I think the call for us this morning is for us to center our lives around one thing, and that one thing is not our dreams, but God dreams for this space. What is it that God dreams for this space? I'm going to try coming down here one more time to talk to you about what I think the dream of God is. For me, this is the best story. I love the story. I love the story of the gospel. And the story of the gospel in Luke, as Luke tells it, starts with Jesus entering a synagogue and opening the Isaiah scroll and saying, oh, there's something in here about releasing the captivities, preaching good news to the poor, recovering sight to the blind, freeing the oppressed. And then Jesus says, and I have been anointed to come in today and make that dream a reality for you. That's how the book of Luke starts. Anybody know what happened? Sunday school moment. Did anybody know what happened after Jesus read that? They tried to kill him. He came in and told them that he was going to recover sight to the blind and preach good news to the poor and set all the prisoners free, and they tried to kill him. And then Jesus went and preached the sermon, not a sermon on the mount, that's Matthew, the sermon on the plain, which is why I'm down here, so I can see you eye to eye. In Luke, see, everybody's on the same level. And then Jesus goes in, and in Luke chapter 9, it says something really important. The most important thing in Luke, the thing that makes Luke so very different than every other gospel. It says on the Mount of Transfiguration. Does anybody remember what was transfigured on the Mount of Transfiguration? Yeah. Yeah, Jesus' face. Jesus is on the Mount of Transfiguration, and his face changed. And it says, he set his face toward Jerusalem. Luke is about the journey toward Jerusalem. There's actually 2 volumes of Luke, Luke and Acts. Luke is about Jesus going to Jerusalem. Acts is about Paul going to Rome. Jesus set his face toward Jerusalem. Now, there are a couple of different theories about what Jerusalem is and how important it is, what role it plays in the Gospel of Luke. Some people think that the journey to Jerusalem is about going to the cross, about the crucifixion. So the whole Gospel of Luke is centered around Jesus going to the cross, the crucifixion. I think that that's a valid interpretation. It's important, and I could have that conversation with you, but I'm in another camp, a slightly different camp. The camp that says Jesus was going to Jerusalem not just to be crucified, but going to Jerusalem because Jerusalem plays a central role in the gospel narrative, in the scripture narrative, in the whole narrative of scripture. From the beginning, Jerusalem is the place that's supposed to be the birthplace for the center of God. Jerusalem is this place known as a thin space, where heaven is almost within grasp. It's the place where the temple is, where broken people come to find healing. It's the place where hurting people come to find wholeness. The gospel is about the center of Jerusalem. It's supposed to be the place where the birth of the dream of God comes about. Jesus set his face to Jerusalem. He set his face towards going to the place where the birth of the dream of God was going to become a reality. So then what happens is Jesus goes up to a whole crowd of people a few weeks ago. You might have read this passage. And he sends out 72 folks, and he says to them this. He says, go into all the towns ahead of me. Ahead of me. Where would that be? Somewhere on the road towards where? Jerusalem. And Jesus sends out 72 people ahead of him to go out on their way towards the birth of the dream of God. And he says, go into every house and every village that you find and talk to them and share with them and tell them the importance of what we're doing. Now, there was this guy, this scholar named John Dominic Crossan. And John Dominic Crossan was doing the historical Jesus stuff. And he said what Jesus was an alternative boundary keeper. He was going around to all the places and finding all the people who had been left out and outcast and left for dead, hurting and broken people who had no place that they could belong. And Jesus was restoring them and welcoming them and bringing them along and telling them, this is a space where the dream of God is coming to pass. And so Jesus sent the 72 out in order to make a way for them. He says, go into the places and tell them that the broken are finding healing, that the outcasts are being welcomed, that the birth of the dream of God is at hand. And if they listen to you, great. That's great. You found a home there. You have found friends. Make family, spend time with them, eat with them, build a beloved community together. If they don't listen to you, that's okay. Don't take it to heart. It's not your fault. Because remember, if they don't listen to you, if this dream is not compelling to them, then it's not going to be compelling. They're not going to listen to me. They're not going to listen to anything Jesus has to say. And if they don't listen to Jesus, they're not going to listen to God. And if they don't listen to God, what makes you think that the birth of the dream of God would happen in that space? Just wipe the dust off your feet and go to the next place. Then there's a story about a doctor who asked an important question, who is my neighbor? And Jesus says, well, if you have people who are left for dead on the side of the road, you're not a very good neighbor. Just take care of that first. Then everything else will happen. So then Jesus goes into the home of Martha and Mary. Now, this is why it's so important to tell this story for me, because most of us do not recognize that Martha and Mary are the place where Jesus is going into their home to do what he sent the other 72 to do before him. Jesus told them to go in and share the story. Jesus is in Martha and Mary's home on the way to Jerusalem and Bethany to tell the story. He sits down at their table and he starts to go through it, and he shares with them that the broken are finding healing, that the outcasts are being welcomed, that the birth of the dream of God is at hand, and don't you want to be a part of it? Well, Martha must have not heard a single word. Or maybe she heard it, but it wasn't compelling to her. She's too busy. She was too distracted. Now, there's some feminist arguments in here about Mary and the nature of work, and we could get into that conversation. It would be really good to have. I don't have the time for it this morning, but what I want you to do, to notice, is that when Jesus invites Martha, this may be one of the most important moments in the story. The weight of this moment is heavy because Martha could have said no. Martha could have said no to Jesus. She came in and interrupted Jesus as he was teaching, and she says, what about Mary? She's sitting there. She's too busy with everything else that's going on. Why can't she get up and help me? And then Jesus looks at Martha, and Martha, Martha, he says her name twice. Martha, Martha, you're so distracted about everything. Now, I have been in your church meetings. I have sat in church council meetings and mission meetings and planning meetings and groups called bridging meetings all over the association. And I'll tell you, most of our churches are like Martha. We're busy, busy, busy about many, many, many things. Sometimes we argue over what color the carpet's going to be, whether we want stained glass or not. But Jesus says to Martha, there's only one thing you need to be concerned about. Only one thing you need to be concerned about. And Mary knows what it is. Mary found it. And guess what? Once you get it, you can't take it away. We can't let you take this away from Mary. But the question is for you, Martha, do you want to be a part of what God is doing? Do you want to be a part of the birth of the dream of God? This is the only thing that matters. The only thing that matters is the dream of God. Now, I think that Martha must have said yes. Because as we know it, Martha and Mary and Lazarus and their whole home becomes a centerpiece for the story of the gospel. But I'm here this morning to ask you, and I'm going to come back up here to my notes because this is the part where I ask the transactional question. Like Martha, when Jesus asked her Martha, you're distracted about everything. There's only one thing that matters. Do you want to come along and be a part of this journey? This morning, I'm here to invite you to be a part of a journey, a part of a movement with the Living Water Association. Us 150 congregations in Northeast Ohio. They came and invited me to come with one purpose, to try to take our 150 congregations and get good at caring for our communities. So God is calling 150 of us to journey together to discover what the dream of God looks like for Northeast Ohio. For places like West Park. For the whole city of Cleveland. For the whole Rust Belt. What's the dream of God look like here in 2019? What do we believe that God cares about in this space? You know, Americans have a really hard time talking about poverty, so I'm going to talk about poverty. Poverty does not have to be the thing that you care about, it's something I care about. America has really inept tools to deal with some of the most important problems. We have one tool called the federal poverty line. Now, it's important. It helps us sort of gauge who is poor and who is not. But you know, it's really inept at talking about poverty because it doesn't factor in the cost of living, no matter where you live. The United Way created this thing called ALICE. Anybody ever heard of it? ALICE stands for Asset Limited, Income Constrained, but Employed. It names people who are working people, but they have trouble coming up with at least every month they have to juggle whether they're going to pay for rent or food or health care or child care. So at some point, they're going to have to decide whether they're going to pay rent or whether they're going to pay for child care or whether they're going to pay for electricity. And most of the time they pay for child care because if they don't, they'll lose their job. Cuyahoga County, according to the United Way, Cuyahoga County has 534,000 people. 17,000 of them live in a place called West Park. You know, 44111, that's your zip code, right? There's 17,000 people who live in this town. 47% of them are ALICE families. 47% of them, that's 251,000 in Cuyahoga County and 8,000 people right here in West Park who have to balance between whether they're going to pay for food or rent or housing or health care or child care. 8,000 people right here within walking distance from your sanctuary. $251,000 people. Now I imagine 47% means that some of you here in the pews, you're just like that. You're struggling from day to day. Well, this story should remind you God is walking with you. But for all the rest of us, we're here to ask the question, what does the dream of God look like for a space like this? And what I pray this morning is that we hear Jesus' invitation. I pray that we hear the invitation that Jesus gave to Martha. You've been concerned for so long about so many things, but the world is getting ready to change. The question that's out for you now is, do you want to be a part of something monumental? Do you want to be a part of something fantastic? Something life-changing, world-altering? Would you like to join the rest of the 150 of us and be a part of seeing what it would look like for the birth of the dream of God to happen in Northeast Ohio? There's only one thing. Of all the things that you care about, only one thing matters the most. Would you like to join the rest of us that are desperately yearning with creation to see the birth of the dream of God come to pass? Would you like to see it happen here in West Park? You're welcome to invite me back. I would love to meet with your mission committee, with any other committee that you have, to sort of talk about what resources you have, what resources the association has, the things that we could do to help you either take what you're doing that's really great and build on it, or maybe help other churches in the area borrow from it. But for us to get together and work to see the building of the dream of God come to pass here. Would you like to be a part of it? It's my invitation to you this morning. Thank you.